Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Yud Daled in Masechet Avodah Zarah. We are at the Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Bet. And so we can really just go ahead and get started because on some level, this Mishnah is telling us something new. But so let me share my screen and we'll be ready to go. So we have been discussing how there are certain times when one cannot do business with an idolater. That's what that's this Masechet does not go into the prohibition of idolatry. We covered most of that in Masechet Sanhedrin, but rather this deals a lot with our dealings with people who are idolaters, and the often rabbinic, but sometimes biblical prohibitions associated with dealing with them. And so we said that there are certain times of years associated with their holidays when we don't want to do business with them, either because they will take the item that we sold to them and they will use it for idolatry, or and that will be some kind of violation potentially of lifnei iver, because even though, before a blind person, don't put a stumbling block, because even though they're not Jewish, if there's a commandment that they're commanded to, we as Jews can't facilitate their violation of that commandment, and they're commanded not to engage in idolatry. Idolatry is something that's prohibited to everybody. And so we said that in connection with their holidays, we're worried about them, or we're worried that they will be just thankful for having done good business with you, and they will speak to their God with the lowercase g and say thank you. And we don't want to be the cause of their saying thank you. And so for all those reasons, in connection with their main holidays, not only is the holiday itself prohibited, but even doing business with them the 3 days before the holiday would be prohibited. And now we are going to see that there are some items that are so frequently used by idolaters in connection with their worship that we actually say that we're not allowed to do business with them with respect to these items at all times. And so that's where we're going to pick up right now. These are things that you cannot sell to a non-Jew. Again, and Rashi points out, right? Asur limkor la'oved kochavim. Second Rashi on the in the Mishnah, dilatzorech avodas kochavim kabaila, because they need it in order to engage in their idol worship, and so we don't want to facilitate that. So what are these items? We're not going to translate these items right now because the Gemara is going to tell us what a number of these items are. So it's trovalin, whatever that is, uvnos shuach, and whatever that is, benos shuach. So uftotarot and stems. So we're going to understand right now, we'll understand stems as being a third thing. I don't know exactly why anybody would have stems as a third item. In the end, the Gemara is going to tell us that what it really refers to is that it's terovlin and benos shuach are both things that grow from the ground and have themselves stems. And it's much nicer when you include the stem in the offering. And so as a result, it's only when they have the stems that it's prohibited to sell to them. Ulavona, that's part of the ketores that we have, the incense that we have. It's frankincense. V'tarnegol halavan, and a white rooster. So all of those, you cannot do business with them at any point during the year because these are things that they would use for their holidays. So to worship their gods. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, muter limkor lo tarnegol lavan bein hatarnegolim. Now, not clear whether this Rabbi Yehuda's statement is a machlokes or a clarification. Certainly seems like Rambam says that it's a clarification because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda. But what does Rabbi Yehuda say? He says that you can sell the white rooster when it's mixed up with other roosters, meaning you're not just selling it, you're selling a whole bunch. And so as a result, nobody would buy the whole bunch just for the white one. So as a result, that's going to be fine. And when it's by itself, so kotea es etzba'o umochro lo, You know how you can sell it? You cut off one of its toes. And that way, it's not a perfect animal. It's obvious that it's not a perfect animal. And while the Jewish concept of blemish in connection with animals is much stricter than this, no, non-Jews also, idol worshippers also, are not going to want to offer an animal that has an imperfection in it. Because again, idol worshippers don't bring something that has something missing. If it has a toe missing, it's not a nice thing for their God. And so as a result, that's why if you cut off the toe, that's going to be permitted. The Rishonim talk about whether or not this is tsar balei chayim, whether you're harming a living animal, and so, but that's beyond what we'll cover for right now. But all right, so now we have the original 5 items qualified somewhat by Rebbe Yehuda, and the Mishnah continues with ushar kol dvarim, everything else in the world, staman mutter, if it was sold just stam, meaning you're just selling them some item, a pen or whatever, then it's fine. Uperushan asor. But if they do some kind of specification about it, and we'll learn what the specification is in the Gemara shortly, so then it's going to be prohibited, even when we're talking about other items. Now, exactly again what that is, we'll see in a moment. Rabbi Meir says, Af dekel tav v'chatzav v'niklas asor limkor la'ovdei kochavim. Even a nice date palm or a chatzav and a niklas, again, those are 2 items that we will define in the Gemara. Those also are prohibited to sell to idol worshippers because, again, according to Rebbe Meir, they also are used in the worship of idols. And again, we will be explaining this in the Gemara. Basically, Rashi, throughout our Mishnah, says over and over again, Mefarish b'Gemara. So now we're turned to the page to Daf top of Yudalit Amud Aleph for the Gemara. And let's keep both a finger in the Gemara and on Rashi. So we're going to just start with the top Rashi, and we're going to go through basically a bunch of the Rashis in a row, and because these are not typical words that you see in the Gemara. So my itzravolin. So right, our first item that we can't sell to a non-Jew, irrespective of the time of year, is an itzravolin. What is that? Tornisa, that's a tornisa. Well, what's a tornisa? That doesn't really help us. So thankfully, Rashi knew what a tornisa is. And so he says, min erez, it's a kind of cedar. Vihi shata kida amar b'Rosh Hashanah. And it, I believe it, and it has actually some kind of fruit that's associated with it, as is said in Rosh Hashanah. It's the shita that is referenced in Rosh Hashanah, and actually it has some kind of, I think it may have some kind of fruit with it. Uraminhu, 1 second though, how can you say that it's Dervolin is a tornisa? Because we have the following brisa that says the following: Hosifu alayhen, they added to it. Now, what in the world did they add to? Well, thankfully, again, Rashi tells us le'inyan shvius, that they added to the items that are subject to the prohibition of shvius. This is the prohibition that in the 7th year you're not allowed to do business with certain products that grow from the ground. Rather, all of it is essentially hefker, and anybody who wants to come into your field and take the item, they're allowed to do it. So what did they add to this to be subject to Shemitah? Elechsin, itzravolin. So there's our item. They added itzravolin to the items that are subject to Shemitah. Mochsasin uvno shuach, v'isal kadaitach itzravolin tornisa. And if you think that itzravolin is tornisa mi'isa b'shvius, could tornisa actually be subject to shvius? Because we have a hatanya, we have a baraisa, right? The Aleph takes us to the Masoras Hashas, which changes Vatanan to Vatanya because it's a baraisa, not a Mishnah. Zehaklal, here's the rule: Kol sheyeshlo ikar, anything that has a root, yeshlo shvius, then it's subject to shvius. V'chol she'ein lo ikar, but anything that does not have a root, Ein lo shvius. And Rashi helps us understand what does all this mean. Kol she'ein lo ikar lehiskayem ba'aretz bi'amosa geshamim. If it has a sufficient root in the item such that it is able to survive winter, well then then it's going to be subject to shviyas. But if it doesn't have that, kagon kishuin, like cucumbers, vidiluin, and gourds, vikiyotza behan, and those kinds of things, where what I guess we eat the root, and it's not we don't view that as, it's not really the root, it's really, that's the fruit almost, it's the vegetable itself. And so as a result, for those vegetables where it doesn't last through the winter, but rather it just grows and it becomes the vegetable itself in the ground, so then it's not subject to shvius. And what does that mean? Ein lo shvius umutter, Rashi, next Rashi, third line of Rashi, end of the line, umutter la'asos mehen skorid, you're allowed to do business with them. So unlike the apples that grow on your apple tree during Shvius, which you're not allowed to gather and sell, when it comes to the kishuim, the cucumbers that grow out of your ground, so then those you would be allowed to. Ve'ena mitzu v'lahafkiran. You are not commanded to leave them hefker, to allow anybody to take them. Now, although this is true, that you are still not allowed to work the land and to cause these things to grow. So it's important to distinguish between the benefit that one can get from these items and the general prohibition of working the land in the seventh year. So that's a qualification that needs to be clarified. But the bottom line is what did we just say? We said that anything that has a root is subject to Shemitah. V'chol she'ein lo ikar is ein lo shvius, is not subject to Shemitah. And tirosin doesn't have a root. And so as a result, how can you say that Tornisa doesn't have a root? So how can you say that its Dravolin is equal to Tornisa? Its Dravolin is listed among the items that are subject to Shemitah, and Tornisa wouldn't be because it doesn't have a root. So as a result, we offer a new interpretation. So what is its Dravolin? Ela Amar of Safra, Peirei de Arza. It's a fruit of an erez tree. It's the fruit of some kind of cedar. V'chein bin asa rabin, v'chein ki asa rabin Amar Rabbi Lazar, Peirei de Arza. So when it came to defining what in its Revolin is, not only did Rav Safra say it's the fruit of an erez tree, but also when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, he also said in the name of Rabbi Lazar that it is the fruit of an erez tree. So that is what its Revolin is. So now we know that what the first item is. So we're ready to go to the second item. The second item in our Mishnah, is Benos Shuach. Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Te'ene chivarasa. It's a white fig, a white te'ena, a white fig. Ufitotros. Okay, so we've got that. Now we're going to the third item. So Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bifitotro sehen shanu. That what we're talking about is with their stems. So it's not a third item, as I mentioned in the Mishnah, although it looks like it's a third item in the Mishnah. The stems mean with the stems. And Rashi says, first of the narrow lines in Rashi, and shanu, petotros de masnisin, when it refers to the stems in their Mishnah, lav minhu, that's not a separate category, ba'ape nafshe, on its own. Ella hachikamer, this is what it's saying. Ein mokrin lahen, kol elu, it's the revolin, ubenos shuach, ba'oktehen, that when you can't sell the fruit of the cedar, fruit of the cedar, and you can't sell the white figs, it means that you can't sell them when they are still connected to their stem. Lefishatolin osan bifnei avodas kochavim. Because how would they use these fruit in their worship? They would hang them from the stem and v'darkan la'ovdan b'kach, and that would be their form of worship, because maybe it would create a nice smell or whatever. But the bottom line is that they would only, the form of worship would be to hang them from the stem, and so if they don't have the stem, you can't hang them from the stem, and therefore they wouldn't be used, and that's why it needs to be only when it's with the stem. So Levona, the next item in our Mishnah, what looked like the fourth item was Levona, frankincense. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Levona Zaka. It means a kind of pure Levona, and Rashi tells us min Levona. This is a kind of frankincense, so it's one specific frankincense. Okay, and that sort of covered us for the Rashis for the first bit. Now you can just focus your finger on the Gemara. And now the Gemara is going to say, okay, so we've got the five items, because the right rooster doesn't need any further definition. We are now ready to sort of move on and go to the next piece of the Gemara, which says, where the Gemara is going to quote a brisa that qualifies the restrictions on selling these items. So we said there are these 4 items that you just generally can't sell at all. It's Revolin, B'nai Shuach, the Levona, and the white rooster. And so now we're going to say, you know what? It's not always true. Tana, we have a brisa. Umikulan mokran lahen chavila. In each case, you can sell them as a bundle, because if you sell one, you know that the person is going to use it and to hang it. It's not as if this is something that they would take a whole bunch and hang all of them. So each person would hang just one, and so as a result, it's not something that they need to. That if you sell as a group, you don't have to worry about it. The kama chavila. So how much constitutes a bundle? So Perish Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, ein chavila pechusa mishlosha manin. That as long as it's 3 mana in weight, so then that's going to be sufficient to cause to be that you don't have to worry about selling it as a group, and so as a result, that's going to be okay. And a mana is equal to 100 zuz, so it's imagine 100 small coins. That's going to be 1 mana, and so 300 small coins, the weight of 300 small coins, that's going to be the weight of something that would be considered a bunch. Why don't we need to worry about somebody buying it from you, taking it apart, and selling it on to other people who are going to use it as a sacrifice? So Amar Abaye, alifnei mapkidan, alifnei delifnei lo mapkidinan. That when it comes to the concern about lifnei iver lo titain mechshol, that we don't want to put a stumbling block in front of the blind, what you can't do is put the stumbling block in front of the blind. But if the person that you're doing something for is going to then do something else that is going to put the stumbling block before the blind, so then you're allowed to do it, because you're not the one putting it in front of them. You're one step removed. And so as a result, that's why you can sell it as a bunch, and we don't worry about somebody taking out one and trying to sell that specific one. Okay, so now let's talk about that white rooster, or Tarnago Lavan. Did you have a question?
No, I was just saying white rooster.
Yeah, exactly, white rooster. So have you ever seen a white rooster? I don't think I've ever seen a white rooster.
No.
So all right, so anyway.
Roosters, but never white.
Yeah. So the idea here is that the white rooster would be used in an idol worshiping ceremony. And so we don't want to sell that to anybody who's going to worship an idol, because we think idol worshiping is bad.
We don't see a brown rooster.
Yeah. Oh, you see it? Yeah, brown rooster is much more common, 100%.
Never white.
So Amar Rabbi Yonah, Amar Rabbi
You see
Zira,
white cats.
Amar Rabbi Zvid. Yeah, white cat, much more common.
Yeah.
The Ika Damasne, Amar Rabbi Yonah, Amar Rabbi Zera. So it's
How many white
either,
roosters are there?
I don't know. I have no idea how many, but we're going to learn about what you should do with them or what you shouldn't do with them. So either this was taught by Rabbi Yonah in the name of Rabbi Zera in the name of Rabbi Zid, or it was just taught by Rabbi Yonah in the name of Rabbi Zera. Tarnagolami. If somebody calls out and says, who has a rooster? And they don't reference the fact that it's white. So now we have, again, this idol worshiper is calling out, I need a rooster. Now, what do you do with a lot of roosters? A lot of roosters, you just shech them and you slaughter them and you eat them. So maybe this person just wants a rooster to eat. So mutter limkor lo lintarnagol lavan. Then, because he just was seeming to look for a rooster generally, he wasn't specifically looking for a white rooster. So that's why you're allowed to sell a white rooster to him in that situation. Tarnagol lavan lami, but if he asks specifically for a white rooster, well then asur limkor lo tarnagol lavan. Then you can't sell him a white rooster. So that's the statement that Rabbi Yonah makes in the name of Rav Zarah, in the name, potentially in the name of Rav Zvid as well. And the point is that we are now going to offer two different challenges to this statement. So challenge number one, both challenges I think are from our Mishnah. So what did we say? Tnan, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mochahu lo tarnagol lavan beina tarnagolin. When can you sell, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a tarnagol in our Mishnah? You can sell a white rooster among many roosters. So, hey Chidami, what's the case of when the person in our Mishnah, the Jew in our Mishnah, is selling a white rooster among many roosters? If you had that the idol worshiper was calling out and seeking a white rooster, well then afilu ben hatarnagol and namilo. I would have thought that even selling a white rooster without any other rooster, even with other roosters, would be problematic because you are fulfilling their wish. They specifically want a white rooster. Why do they want a white rooster? In order to worship an idol. So if you sell them a white rooster, even with other roosters, you're fulfilling their desire to have the right rooster for the idol worshiper. So it must be that when we allow the sale of the white rooster with other roosters, it must be that the non-Jew is asking for roosters generally and is not specifically asking for a white rooster. And yet, what did we see? We said in our Mishnah that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can only sell the white rooster with other roosters. So that seems to contradict Rabbi Yonah. So afilu haki l'Rebbe Yehuda beina tarlagolin in bifnei atzmo lo. Right, the Rebbe Yehuda said even though the person asked for roosters generally, you could only sell the white rooster with other roosters, not on an individual basis. U'atanakama afilu beina tarlagolin namilo. And if we say that Rebbe Yehuda disagrees with our Tanakama, well then our Tanakama would say that even if the rooster is with other roosters, you would not be allowed to sell it. So that seems to be a contradiction of what Rabbi Yonah taught us, that if you ask for just a rooster generally, you could sell that person a white rooster. So Amar Rav Nachman answers the problem. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Hacha b'mayaskin. And here's what we're talking about. Kagon de Amar zevizet, where the person says, I want white roosters and black roosters, or white roosters and brown roosters. And he wants all different kinds of roosters. When he says that, that's where you can sell the white rooster with other roosters, because presumably that just shows he wants white in among them. He's not specifically doing it for idol. And on the other hand, if he, whereas in the case of Rabbi Yonah is dealing with a situation where you only ask for either white or non-white, or white or roosters generally. So when you ask for white, so then it's going to be a problem no matter what to sell the white rooster. But when you ask for roosters generally, so then you can sell an individual white rooster. And so that's the situation that we're dealing with. And
perhaps you could learn a little differently. Initially, he says tarnagol lemi. He asks for yachid. He doesn't say tarnagolot. Here we're saying is a mixture. He says, I want white with these. So, and now he's using he's speaking berabim instead of a yachid. When he said tarnagol lemi, you think then he's really limiting himself to one rooster. And if the one rooster is white, then you're not allowed to sell it to him.
Correct.
So I'm focusing on the yachid versus Rabim versus.
Yes, 100%. When you say zeh v'zeh, then you're highlighting that the problem is that it's not, you don't just want one rooster, you want multiple roosters. You don't care, you want all different colors. And so as a result, according to the Tanakama, it would be prohibited to sell even a group with white roosters because white rooster was mentioned. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can sell it in a group because people don't generally buy white roosters in a group in order to just get the white rooster. And that all doesn't have anything to do with Rabbi Yonah's statement, because Rabbi Yonah's statement is exactly as Ken is pointing out, that it's when it's talking about singular, when you ask for an individual one. Then you can't sell the white one if he mentions the white one. And Tanya Nami Hoki, so we have in fact a brisa that supports this. Rabbi Yehuda Amasai. When is it that you can't sell the white rooster? So Bisman Sha'amar Tarnagol Zelavan. If I want this white rooster. Aval Im Amar Zevizeh, if he's looking for white roosters and other non-white roosters, well then mutar. Then it's going to be permitted to sell it as a group, and that would be allowed, but not necessarily individually.
If a non-Jew asks you for a white rooster and you say no, and he says why, you have to give an explanation.
That's a good question. Well, one is you would try to avoid that because you don't want to cause anger and upsetness, but you don't have to give them the reason. Obviously, that's up to you whether you want to give them reason. Probably you wouldn't want to tell them the reason, but it's of course, if he sees that you have a white rooster, you're going to have a little bit of difficulty. So you have to be, this is
diplomatic with
you
that
have to be
answer.
you have to be diplomatic in how you deal with it, because and yet at the same time, note that we don't say that you're just allowed to go ahead and sell it because we're worried about what he's going to do to you. So it's an interesting thing. Some people try to derive from this that even this would be subject to the prohibition of Yarog Val Yaver, that if he threatens your life, you have to not sell it to him and give up your life. But that's not the majority. I don't think that's the majority.
That would be stretching thing because you're not actually doing the Avodah Zarah. You're giving it to someone else who would do it.
Correct. And that's why many of the Rishonim say that it's not considered. But based on Wayne's question, that's exactly why some people say in this Gemara, it seems like maybe even this would be subject to the prohibition of Yarog Val Yaver, that you have to give up your life rather than violate it. Okay, and now the Brisa continues. Va'afilu, that we're citing in order to support the point, but we've already proven it. Va'afilu amar tarnagol zeh. And even if you say, I want this rooster, Ovid kochavim she'asa mishtelivno, if the person who's buying it is just making a party for his son, so then Oshahaya lo chola b'to beito, or he has somebody at home who's sick. So as a result, it's clear that he wants to buy it in order to slaughter it, in order to feed it to somebody. Well, then mutar, then it's going to be permitted. 1 second, though, Bahatanan, we learned in our Mishnah earlier, the Mishnah on Daf Chet Amud Aleph, Ovid Kochavim She'asa Mishta Libno, that we said one of the times that you're not allowed to do business with an Ovid of Zarah is when a person is throwing a wedding party for his son. So here you just said that you could sell this tarnagol to the person celebrating the wedding party, but we learned that you can't do that. So Eino Aser Ela Oto Ayom, and we said, unlike the other prohibitions where there's a prohibition to sell it 3 days ahead of time, here the prohibition is only to sell it on that day. On the day, because people want fresh meat, so that we're worried that we don't want you to sell it on that day. And just that person, meaning you don't have to prohibit, you can sell to that person's neighbor. You don't have to, it's not the entire city. Unlike when you have a holiday for an entire city, the whole city is prohibited. You can't do business with anybody in the city, and you can't do any business for the 3 days before. But the bottom line is, Ozayom, but Ozayish Mia Aser. That name, person, and on that day is prohibited. So how can you have just said that if the person needs the rooster for the wedding party of his son, that we're going to allow you to sell it? So Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Masharshia b'tavzig. We're dealing with a situation of tavzig. So what is that? So we define it on the screen. You can see it's defined as a social banquet. But what is that? What does that specifically mean? So let's take a look at the Rashi, fourth line from the very bottom of Rashi's on Yudalin Amnala. Hi, Mishta Dikatani, that this party that we learned, mutter, that we learned that it would be permitted, limkorlo tarnago lavan, where it would be permitted to sell the white rooster. Lav Mishnah chupas beno. It's not the wedding party. Because if you sell something when it's the son's wedding party, well, then if it's something that could be used as an offering, for sure it's going to be as an offering, because their weddings were moments of idolatry, and so they would focus on the idol worshiping during the course of the ceremony. But rather, we're dealing with now a friendly party, a party where you get the kids together in order to, maybe to, this highlights that, well, this is for non-Jews, so it doesn't necessarily prove anything for about Jews, but a social gathering. The idea is to have a social gathering. V'korin kamparusha. I'm not sure exactly what old French word that is, but that's what it was called in Old French. Delo chashiv kulihai. That's not such an important event. Shiakrivu la'avodas kochav. That you would necessarily bring an offering to an idol in connection with it. So as a result, that's why that's going to be okay. So now that was question number one. So we use our Mishnah once to ask on Rabbi Yonah's statement that if the person just asks for a rooster, you can sell him a white rooster. And we said, you know what? Even though you might have thought that was the implication of our Mishnah, it's not the implication of our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is not dealing where you ask for a white rooster or a non-white or a rooster generally, but it's where you ask for a white rooster and other colors of rooster. And so as a result, that's the situation where you can only sell the white rooster with the rest of the group. But now let's again ask from our Mishnah on Rabbi Yonah's statement, Tanan ushar kol hadvarim, and when it comes to everything else other than a white rooster and all the other things that we listed in our Mishnah, staman mutter upeirushan aser, when you don't specify it, then it's going to be permitted, and when you specify it, it's going to be prohibited. So my staman, what does it mean that we don't specify, that it's unspecified? Umay perushan. And what does it mean that you do specify? So we're going to clarify, we're going to offer one suggestion, and based on that suggestion, we're going to say that Rabbi Yonah's statement that if you ask for a rooster, that if an idol worshiper asks for a rooster generally, you could sell him a white rooster. So that's the question. That's the statement that we're going to question. And now we're going to do so by defining what specified and unspecified mean. So that if you ask for white wheat and you're specifying the specific color, and that just means that's what you mean when we say unspecified. It's unspecified in that you didn't say you wanted it for idol worship. Okay, so that's why it's considered unspecified, even though you mentioned the color that you wanted. And perushin de ka'amar la'avodas kochavim. And when we say specified, we mean not only do you actually specify the color that you want, but you say that you want it for idol worship. Well, that makes total sense, right? But while it makes total sense that the first case would be permitted, that you're allowed to sell the person the white wheat, and in the second case, you're not allowed to sell him the white wheat because he said specifically that he's going to use it for idol worship. But that would be obvious, right? So as we turn to Yudalit Amabet, Lo stama tzrichon lememar de mizabninan. We don't need anybody to tell us that in the non-specified case you can sell him the weiss. V'lo perushan tzricha lememar de lo mizabninan. And you don't need to tell me that when you specify that you're going to use it for idol worship, that you can't sell it to him. Because so as a result, it can't be that specified means means whether or not you say that it's specifically for idol worship. Because if that were the case, it would be so obvious, and so we wouldn't need to say it. So Ella stomach de kamerachite. No. So what we must mean is when we say general, it's if somebody asks for wheat generally, they don't specify the color, and that's where you can sell them anything you want. But perushan de ka'amar chivarata. But if in fact the person asks for white wheat, so then saying white wheat must mean that they want it for idol worshiper, because they're an idol worshiper, and the only reason that they might specify it is because that's going to be for their idol worship. And so as a result, you can't sell them if they ask for something specific. Miklal de tarnagol. So what's the implication? When it comes to the rooster, afilu stama namilo, even if they just ask for a rooster generally, you would not be allowed, because remember, it's only for everything else where we say general is okay and specified is not. So as a result, when it comes to the white rooster, even general is going to be problematic, implying that Rabbi Yonah is incorrect. That when you say I want a rooster, then when the idol worshiper says he wants a rooster, you can't sell him a white rooster even in that situation. So Amre's no, that is not necessarily how you have to answer this. Rather, we can say la'olam staman de kamri chiti chaparata. Really, when you say that it's general, it means you could even ask for white wheat. And when we say perushan de kamar la'avodas kokavim, and when we say specified, it means that the person specifies that they want it for idol worship. Well, 1 second. Again, we have that original statement. Isn't that obvious? We don't need to be taught either of those rules. So uperushan, it's derech, and you know what? You do need to be taught. I might have thought that even when the idol worshiper says, I want white wheat in order to worship my idol, maybe you could sell it to him. Why? Because I might have thought, hi, Gabra, he doesn't really want the white wheat to worship his idol. Ella mevaku, rather, he's very dedicated to his idol worshiping. This Savar, and what does he think? He thinks that I'm so dedicated to my idol worshiping that if somebody were to ask me for some help with their idol worshiping, I would of course make things even easier for them and sell something for them for cheap. So everybody loves this idol that he's worshiping, and so of course, he says, listen, I'm going to say that I'm going to use this white wheat for idol worshiping. So he gives it to me at a cheap price. Right? If somebody comes to you and says, I need, I had this yesterday. Somebody comes to me and says, listen, I want to make a wedding for my kid. I'd appreciate it if you would, sell me something for cheap. Of course, I'm going to sell it for cheap in order to enable the wedding. And so the point is, but the point, if the person's not telling the truth, well, then you've sold it to them for cheap, even when you wouldn't have. So that's exactly what's going on here. He says, listen, I'm going to say I'm going to use it for my religious ceremony, and people will sell it to me for less. So Kamash Malan, even though that might be the reason why he's saying it, if somebody says that they want something for idol worshiping, we got to take them at face value, and we cannot sell to them, even if they might have had another reason for saying it. Okay, so now the Gemara addresses the implication of asking for a mutilated white rooster, right? We said that, so we have not, by the way, the end result is we have not definitively contradicted the statement of Rebbe Yonah. It may be that if somebody asks for a rooster generally, you could sell him the white rooster, even though often idol worshipers would use the white rooster for worship. So by Rav Ashi asked the following question. Tarnago lavon katua lami. If the non-Jew, if the idol worshiper asks the following, he says, I'm looking for a mutilated rooster. Now, obviously, that mutilated rooster, if he finds one, is not going to be used for idol worshiping. So does that mean that he really doesn't want to get a white rooster for idol worshiping? Or, so ma'olim kor lo tarnagol lavan shalem. Can you sell him a fully good, healthy white rooster? Mi amrina midika amra katua lav lavodas akochavim kabai. That since he referenced that he's looking for a mutilated one, he doesn't obviously want one for idol worship. Odilma iarume kamarim. Or maybe he's being a trickster, and he knows that the Jews won't sell him a white rooster if he asks for a white rooster, but maybe they'll sell him a good white rooster if he asks for a bad white rooster. And so as a result, maybe that's why we'll allow it. And imtim selamar hai iarumeku de kamarim. And if you say maybe he is a trickster and he's just trying to get you to give the white rooster, tarnago lavan lami. If the person says, who has a white rooster, v'yavule shechor v'shakal, and then he accepts a black rooster. So he actually goes ahead and he spends the money to buy the black rooster. So in the first case, he never spent any money on a bad rooster, right? It's not as if he first bought the white rooster with the blemish, with a missing toe or whatever. He asked for the blemished rooster, and you wanted to give him a fine white rooster. And so as a result, we say, you know what? We have to be worried that maybe he's a trickster. But here, do we have to be worried that he's a trickster, even if he spent money to buy the black rooster after asking for the white rooster? So, Miyavule Adom v'shakal, and then you sell him not only a black rooster but a red rooster. So ma'olim korlo lavan. Now that you see that he's buying these roosters that are definitely not for idol worshiping, can you now sell him the white rooster? Because now you have greater evidence that maybe he's not being a trickster. So mi amrin and kevin diyavule shachor v'shakal, because he took the adam v'shakal, because he took the black rooster and he took the red rooster, lav lavos kochavim kabai. Clearly, he's not looking for the white rooster in order for idolatry, but rather he just likes the way white roosters taste. Odilma Yarume Kamarim, or maybe this is all part of a larger subterfuge, and he's actually willing to spend money on it. So Teku, it is not resolved, and so as a result, we don't have the answer. And the bottom line is, it seems like we do worry about this kind of trickery, and so as a result, we would avoid selling something that could be used for idolatry, even if it looks like the person might not be, as long as as long as the possibility exists that exactly, as long as there's some reasonable doubt, we're going to avoid doing it. Okay, so our Mishnah ended with Rebbe Meir saying that there are certain other items that also cannot be sold to an idol worshiper. So Rebbe Meir Omer Af Dekel Amar Le Rav Chisda Lavi Mei Gemire de Avodas Kochavim de Abraham Avinu Arba Me'a Pirkei Havyan. That when we have it as a tradition that when it came to Avodah Zarah, when it was Abraham's day, there were 400 chapters about Avodah Zarah because there were so many different kinds of idol worshiping. And of course, when you can't think of Avraham Avinu in connection with idol worshiping without thinking of the famous story in the Midrash of the fact that he broke all the idols, leaves the hammer in the biggest idol's hand, and tells his dad that well, the biggest one did all the break. Anyway, a great story. All right, clearly echoes that ended up coming from later movies and the like seem to have echoes of this. Umay kashalach. Well, so Anan Chamishan Tanan, but we only have 5 chapters. And yet we still don't really understand what's going on in our Masechet. So Umay Kashalach. So Avimi asks back to Rav Chisda. So all right, well, what's your question? So Rav Chisda responds, listen, we have in our Mishnah Rabbi Meir's statement. Rabbi Meir Omer Af Dekel Tav Chatzav the Niklas, that you have a Dekel Tav, a nice date palm, a Chatzav, and a Niklas. All of those asur limkor lo avdei kochavim. You can't sell them to an idol worshiper. So Dekel Tav hu delom is minan. The implication is that you cannot sell a date palm. A date palm is implies a nice tree. So hag dekel bish mizamnin. That implies that you can sell a not nice tree to the idol worshiper. But 1 second, v'hatzanan ein mokrin lahem b'mechuber lakarka, that we're not supposed to sell non-Jews anything that's attached to the ground. This is referring to anything in Israel. As we say, Rashi, this is 3, 6, 9, from the top of the narrow lines in Rashi, it's about 20 lines down. Last word on the line is ein mokrin lahen b'mechuber lakarka. We don't sell anything that's connected to the ground. As we are going to explain coming up on Daf Kaf Amud Aleph, mishum diksiv lo sechanim. It said, the Torah says that you shall not favor them. Now, what does that mean to not favor them? So Rashi continues that lo titain lahem chaniya b'karka, a play on the techanim that of chaniya. Chaniya, of course, is a parking lot in modern Hebrew, but you can't give them any kind of foothold into the land. You should not sell any land in Israel to a non-Jew, and so to an idol worshiper. And so the point is that you can't sell the tree. If you're selling the tree, you're selling the land that's under the tree. And so how can Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah imply that you can sell a not nice tree, but you can't sell a good tree, when we know in the next Mishnah there's going to be a statement that we're going to see in this shortly, that in the Gemara, that and a Bryce, in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah on Daf Yud Ted Amud Bet, that you can't sell anything that's connected to the ground. So Amarle, so Avimi explains to Rav Chisda the following: My dekel tav, when we say a nice date palm, we are not referring to the tree itself. Peiros dekel tav, we mean the fruit from a nice dekel tree. So v'chein Amar Rav Huna Peiros dekel tav. Again, we're not talking about the tree itself, but the fruit from the tree. So that is
food.
Dates. Do you like dates?
Yeah, it's all.
Yeah, dates are pretty good, especially if they're pitted. Okay, so chatzav kashpa. So what is the second item that Rabbi Meir mentioned is this chatzav? What is that? That's kashpa. Well, unfortunately, I have no idea what kashpa means, but thankfully, Rashi tells us. And if we take a look at the next Rashi, so kashpa min tamarim, it's a kind of date. So niklas, so these are basically 2 different kinds of dates that we were just referring to. What about a niklas? Kiyasa Rav Dimi, Amar Rabbi Chama Bar Yosef. So when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that in the name of Rabbi Chama Bar Yosef, kuryate, that is kuryate. Well, what's kuryate? So fortunately, Rashi is going to tell us. But before we get to what Rashi tells us, let's take a quick look at the Gemara, continuing in the Gemara, because Amrle Abai Rav Dimi, Tanan Liklas, we have in our Mishnah the word Niklas, V'lo Yadin and Mahu, and we have no idea what that is. V'at amrat kuryate, and now you tell us that it's kuryate, v'lo yadinin my ahaneslan. And what benefit? V'lo yadinin, we don't know what it is. So what benefit have you done us? All you've said is two words that we have no idea what they mean. And so as a result, you haven't really helped us. So Amar Le, Rav Dimi explains, no, ahane luchu, I have benefited you. Techi aslas hasam, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, Amrat lahu niklas. If you ask them what a niklas is, they'll have no idea. But lo yade, they won't know. Amrat lahu kuryate. But if you ask them what a kuryate is, v'yade, they do know. Become a chavelai lach, and then you can see exactly what it is. And so sometimes, even though we don't know what something is initially, if we can get a little closer, then we can ask somebody else what this other item is. And so kuryate, Rashi tells us. Next Rashi, min peiros. It's a kind of fruit. And we go do the last Rashi, Deki azos lahasam. When you go over there, Eretz Yisrael, when you go to the land of Israel, so now you, Abaye, can figure out what it is. Not because you'll tell them, listen, what in the world is a niklas, but you'll ask them what's a kuryate, and that will enable you to figure it out. So that brings us to the next Mishnah, which continues the list of items that cannot be sold to idolaters at any time. But for that discussion, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Thank you.
One thing. First of all, nice to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
This is from the,
Bye, everybody.